I just picked up this Bassett dresser. It's got 10 drawers, and I decided that as I unloaded the dresser, since all the drawers are out, I'm going to go ahead and blow out all the dust that's on the inside. Wow, was it dusty? So follow along and let's just see how this refinishing project turns out. So here's what the dresser actually looked like with the drawers back in before I started the refinishing process. It's really in pretty good shape, and yeah, I'm going to get rid of the hardware. I don't like those bat wings, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with this yet, but the first step is going to be to remove the hardware and to clean this up. Well, I hope you're sitting down because here's the real exciting part, removing the hardware. You know I'm being a little facetious. Pretty boring, pretty easy to do most of the time, and simply just take out the two screws holding on the old hardware, and excuse me, and then we'll pull all those off. I got to do this with 10 drawers, and once that's done, I'm going to use leftover adjustable screws that have come with other hardware purchases to serve as handles so that I can pull the drawers out. So yeah, we're going to throw all this stuff away, and then the next step is going to be cleaning. So I usually clean a new piece all at once, but this one I'm just going to clean the top. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this dresser. I'm kind of leaning towards a Pottery Barn Sausalito type finish. I haven't done one of those in a while. It might look good on this dresser. But usually when I do that, I paint with a color called Sherwin-Williams. Yeah, that's kind of dirty. Universal Khaki, and then probably glaze over that. This has got some nice grain on the top, and I'm thinking to myself that if I can get this thing stripped, I might try a paint wash. Maybe strip down to it's light, not dark like this. Do a paint wash and then the glaze on top. I've never done that, but I think, because I'm noticing in the Pottery Barn pictures that a lot of grain is showing through, and if you paint it, it's going to hide that grain. So I don't know. We're going to see here, but so I'm going to get some acetone, and I'm about out. So I'm going to have to try a little bit, then probably go get some more. So I'm going to get some acetone and put this on here, and we're going to see what happens. Using acetone as a stripper does not work on all finishes, but it does on a lot, and I think it's going to work on this one as well. So what I do is I lay down some paper towels, I saturate them with the acetone, I let them sit for a few minutes, depending on temperature and humidity and so on and so forth. I sometimes cover it with plastic to slow down the evaporation process, because once it evaporates, then it's not doing its job anymore, and you just got a bunch of gunk that is, you probably have to redo it. So we're going to let this sit for a few minutes, and then we're going to start scraping it off. I always use a plastic scraper, not metal. I have used metal in the past, and what I found is if you're not careful, you can gouge whatever you're scraping. The plastic won't do that. So I always use plastic instead of metal, and I would advise you to do the same thing. So we're going to strip this down, and we're going to see what we have when it's all done. We're going to see if this works, what it looks like. Well, I've got this top stripped. Haven't sanded it yet. I'm going to sand with 320, but this top is in near perfect condition.
it's making me rethink what I want to do with this dresser. So I'm over here, what I thought was dings here was just failed finish. So I'm going to go ahead and strip. I guess I'm going to strip the rest of the dresser and then come back and sand. But so I can see what this looks like. And I may restore this and not paint it. We'll see how this goes.
So I'm going to start working on the drawers next. This took quite a while. I had 10 drawers between starting with steel wool and acetone to strip off the top layer, to sanding, to hand sanding, to a final sanding. This took over an hour per drawer, sometimes an hour and a half. So this took me a minimum of 10 hours to do these drawers. So right now, the first step was to take acetone and I think this was Dewalt steel wool to try to remove the top finish. And next, I'm going to move on to sanding. The next step would be sanding as much as I can with my Surfprep, and then we'll have to, and that's going to be with 120. Where the Surfprep couldn't reach, I had to hand sand. Once that's done, I then moved on to get over what's left with a brush and acetone, and finally back to the Surfprep using a 180 pad to smooth out everything that I had done. This took a long time, very time consuming, very laborious. Sometimes it's not as easy as people tell you it's going to be, but if you're going to do it, you need to do it right so your final project looks great. So after 10 plus hours, here's what the drawers look like. This is before any paint or tan wash rather has been applied to this. I really like how these drawers look. They got great grain. I'm just not going to hide this. I'm not going to paint it. I am going to do a tan wash. And so I'm going to take one of these drawers, and before I do any more on the dresser, I'm going to take one of these drawers as a test and to see, what I like, and to get the tan wash mixture, to the right consistency. And then once we have that, we'll move on from there. But I'm really liking how this is looking so far. I'm very impressed with how these drawers look. So as a test, I'm going to apply the tan wash to a couple of the smaller drawers. You notice that I put tape underneath the holes there on the drawers where the handles go, so paint won't drip through to the bottom. If it does, then I'm going to have to sand that off. So I'm using Sherwin-Williams Universal Khaki with it in a 5-to-1 ratio, one part paint, 5 parts water. And so we're going to do the first drawer, and then we're going to move on to the second drawer. And after the second drawer is done, the first one will be dry enough. This is only taking really a few minutes to paint these drawers. And then I will start to wipe it off and see what I have. So the first drawer is now dried enough, and I'm just taking a white cloth. It's I think it's just a cotton cloth that I'm using, and wiping these down. And once they're wiped down, we'll let them sit for a little bit so they'll dry out, and we'll see what's left and make a decision on how we'll proceed after this. So I ended up doing one of the longer drawers too, just to make sure that it wasn't going to show up anything that's not showing up on the smaller drawers. I do have to make a few adjustments. There's some areas where I think needs a little bit more paint wash, so I'll apply a little bit in there to even it out. And then, when we sand it, we'll even out the whole finish. But I like how this looks. I'm going to proceed this way, and we're going to move on to the dresser. Stripping the dresser and preparing it for paint wash is no different than what I did for the drawers. I'm going to take acetone, and I'm going to strip it all down, and it just, bigger. It's going to be probably a little easier
than the drawers. In fact, it was a little easier. I say it took me between an hour and a half per drawer. It took me another 2-3 hours to strip and sand the dresser down. So we're going to get this down, and then we're going to start sanding, and then we'll start applying the paint wash. Now that the stripping is done, it's back to sanding. I'm using my Surfprep with a 150 to 180 pad on it. It's really good for getting into these detailed areas, as you can see in the video. It doesn't get all of it, but it gets a lot of it. Once I do as much as I possibly can with the Surfprep, then I have to go back and I have to start hand sanding. And so since I'm paint washing this, it's really important to get all the old finish off as much as possible. The paint wash will hide some of it, but not a lot of it. So I just have to keep sanding. This is the most tedious part. I mean, I sanded quite a bit on this dresser. Probably all told with dressers and dresser, probably at least 15, 16 hours of sanding, both with the Surfprep and hand sanding. Sanding the top was easy. Nice, great big flat surface. I started with 120, very lightly. I believe this is a veneer, so I don't want to burn through it. And so very lightly with the 120, and then I went to 180, and I stopped there. But like I said, this is the easy part. The hard part is being careful on the edges not to burn through the veneer. So once the top is done, then we can move on to, I've got to address the base. And we haven't talked about that yet, but that's what I'm going to address next after I get the top all sanded down. In doing a final quality assurance check on the dresser, I noticed that the top has got some unevenness. I think you can see the video where it's darker on the edges, darker in a few places. It looks a little splotchy. So, and I think that will show up through the paint wash. So I need to even this out. So I don't want to, like I said, this is veneers. I'm going to have to be careful because I've sanded a lot on this already. But I'm going to take 220, and I may even run the Surfprep at a lower speed, and just to try to get this blotchiness out and some of this darkness, a little get more of that finish off of here before we paint it. And I think once that's done, then I'll be ready to move forward. But you know, it's important before you start steps like painting to go through your furniture, your piece, and look at it. You know, have you sanded correctly? Have you filled all the places that need filling? You know, you just need to look at it because you want your piece to turn out as good as it can, and leaving imperfections just because you're lazy, you know, is going to reflect on your work. So you want to do the very, very best you can, which is kind of what I'm doing here. I'm going to have to mix more paint wash, but I believe I got just enough to get the detailed part of the dresser done before I start on the sides and the top. And so I'm using just a very small foam brush to apply this. We'll get this all put on, and then we will go let it dry for a minute or so, and then go back and wipe it down. Now I want to point out something that is in the video right here. Excuse me. You see there towards the right there. See all that paint that's on the side that didn't get wiped down? I'm just kind of, yeah, it drips a little bit. I just kind of wipe it. I didn't get that completely wiped off. That caused me issues. It dried, and when I went to put on the paint wash on the sides, it showed up. So I had to sand it down to get that off of there. So beware when you're doing paint washes and you're doing, you know, pieces at a time. Make sure you don't leave drippage on anything you don't want drippage on, because it will dry and it will affect what it's going to look like. I didn't show it, but I did wipe down the trim, and now it's time to
put paint wash on the sides and on the top. So, and I have put a drip cloth underneath this because it's going to drip a whole lot since this is so thin. So I'd recommend having a drip, a drop cloth or an old sheet. An old sheet is what I use actually. But we're going to get this on, and then we're going to let it dry just for a few minutes, and then we're going to wipe it down. Okay, so this is set on here for a few minutes. Now I'm going to wipe it down. And, you might have noticed that the color of the sides is different than the color of the trim. The sides and the top is a walnut veneer, and the trims and the detail parts is something else. I'm not sure what kind of wood it is, but it accepts the wash differently. Which at first, when I first did it, I thought, I don't like that. But once it dried, it came with this kind of a two-tone color that I really started to like. And but that's why it's a little bit different color. And but it's going to turn out great. Trust me when you see the final product. The top is the last place I need to paint wash. You notice that there's a couple of runs on there. Well, those are dried. I didn't catch them when I painted the trim, the detail part, and it dried on the top of the dresser. Now, I talked about that before. What I should have done is I should have sanded it off right then. It would have been easy, but I didn't do it. I went ahead and put the paint wash on, and once it dries, I could see, and I wiped it off, wiped it down, I could see that line. There's two lines. So I didn't show the video, but I did have to deal with it. I did have to sand it down. I used 220 to kind of feather it all in and hide all that. It would have been much easier if I'd done it now. But we'll get this on, let it dry, and a little bit, and then we'll wipe it down. And when I wipe it down, you're going to see that line. The paint wash is completely dry, and now I need to sand it down. The wash really raises the grain. It makes it feel really rough, especially on these trim pieces. Like I said, I don't know what kind of wood that is, but it was really rough. So I'm taking a 180 sheet that I use on my Surfprep. I'm going to do this by hand all over, and so we're going to sand the trim. Then we'll sand the sides and we'll sand the top. Basically, I have to sand the entire dresser in preparation for the top coat. So we're going to get that all smoothed out. I'm going to sand out any imperfections that I may have introduced in the paint wash. On the edges sometimes it builds a little bit, so to speak, because I had paint wash on from doing the trim and then paint wash on from doing the side. And so, I need to sand that down so it feathers it out and makes it look all even. So we'll get this done, and then we're going to address what I really have not talked about, and that's the new base for this dresser. You may have noticed in the previous video that the feet on this dresser were missing. I didn't show it, but I removed them. They were pretty easy to remove. They simply just unscrewed off, and so that made it really simple. But what I did find when doing that is the sides of the dresser came down, and the feet and the sides attached to it. And that's what you're seeing here. Well, that's not going to work for the new base. I need more room, and so I'm going to have to remove it. I was hoping I wasn't going to have to, but I do. So I'm going to take my jigsaw and try to remove this, and we're going to see, how that works out before I take further steps. But it didn't work out very well. So to remove what I didn't cut off, I thought maybe I could do that with my Orbital with a 60 grit sanding sheet on here. Well, that didn't work out very well either. It was taking me a while, and not very much was coming off. So I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do now? Because it's got to be flat.
So I decided to get out my planer. This is turning out to be pretty much of a hassle. So luckily, a few years back, I bought a Ryobi battery-powered planer, portable planer. So I set it, I believe, to 1/32 to plane down. I knew I had to make multiple passes, but I don't want to go further than I need to. And so this turned out to work pretty darn good. I got this down to where it should be, and then I also had to do this on the other side. But finally, it was all flat, and I took my Orbital and sanded down then the entire, what was left, sanded it all down smooth so that I could then put the new base on. Measuring for the base is relatively simple, but this is certainly a case where you want to measure twice, cut once. So I decided I wanted to leave an inch margin along the outside of the base, between the outside of the base and the existing trim on the dresser. The feet come from a block of wood that is 1.5 by 1.5. So in order to do my measurements for the front board of the base, I would take the length of the dresser. I'm going to subtract 1 inch for the margins, and then 3 inches to account for the 2 legs. I'm basically going to do the same type of measurement for the sides. Again, I'll measure the width of the dresser, subtract the inch for the total margin, and then 3 inches for to account for the legs, and that will be the length of the sides of the new base. Now that I've got those measurements done, it's time to go cut. I could do this after I cut, but I do need to do some prep work on the boards I'm going to use for the base, and I decided to do that before I make my cuts. I'm using oak for the base, and I don't want the paint wash to be splotchy at all, and so I'm going to lightly seal it with a 1-to-1 mixture of SealCoat and denatured alcohol. I'm going to put that on. I've got one long board that I was able to purchase for the base itself, and then I've got the block, the 1.5 by 1.5 block of oak that I will cut for the legs. So I'm going to seal this really quick, and then we'll, after that dries, then we'll go and move on to actually making the cuts. Okay, so I've got stops on my workbench. It's way down here. It says 62 inches. So, and if I measure this, it should say 62 inches. And the little laser comes down and says 62 inches. So that's going to be our first cut, right? 62. And then 2 at 15.5. So here's the first cut. So I apologize. The video of me actually making the base, drilling the pocket holes, so on and so forth, did not come out. So this is the finished base. You can see back there the pocket holes that I drilled, both the legs and to attach to the dresser. Um, and basically, I've got on the sides two sets of pocket holes to attach to the dresser, and on the front, I've got three sets of pocket holes. So I need to mark where my margins. It was a half inch on the front, half inch on the sides. So I'm using this little Craig tool to mark the half inch margins. And then once I get those marked and I'm satisfied that this is where it needs to be, then I will begin to, I'll anchor the base on both ends with a pocket screw, and then a pocket screw at the back of the base, and then I'll go ahead and fill in with the rest of them. We are finally ready for top coat. I'm using Minwax Polycrylic in a matte finish. I also tinted the top coat. I just kind of eyeballed it. I just took a little bit of the universal khaki, I don't know, maybe a teaspoon or two, and I put it into the polycrylic and stirred it up. That way it'll darken it up just slightly, but also it'll make sure that I don't leave it looking milky at all. So we're going to put, this is the first of three coats I'm going to put on here, sanding between all three coats. And then after that, we're going to turn our attention back to the drawers and do some drawer liners. I am using, by the way, a Wagner 3500 sprayer. I've had the best luck with this sprayer. For polycrylic, I usually put the air pressure to about a 3, and the airflow, I turn it about 5 turns on the canister, so to speak, and that seems to give me a pretty good flow. But as always, you should always test, make sure that your settings are right. I mean, every time that I paint with something new, I record the settings so that I can duplicate it the second time once I get it all dialed in. In this dresser, I'm going to be putting in drawer liners. I don't always do that. It depends on the condition of the drawers. But on these, a few of the drawers had some really bad bottoms. So I decided to go ahead and put drawer liners in. Now, people do this all kinds of different ways. Well, probably only a couple of ways. But some pre-cut, and they measure and pre-cut so they can just lay it right in. I don't do that. I've found that sometimes, and I don't know how or why this happens, but the drawers are not completely square. I mean, they slide in just fine, but when I put a drawer liner on the bottom, for whatever reason, it doesn't fit quite right. So I usually put the drawer on top of the paper I'm going to use, and then I will cut around it so I have a little bit of overlap. I use peel and stick wallpaper, and I suggest that you get decent paper. In my area, in the Tampa Bay area, it's anywhere from $30 to $50 a roll. And the cheaper it is, it just isn't as high a quality, and it tends to rip more when you start to cut it, or doesn't cut well. So after I've got my paper cut, then the hard part is to get the backing off the paper. It seems like it takes forever sometimes. But so then I'm going to pull the backing off, and then I will place the paper inside the drawer so that it overlaps on all sides, and then I start to smooth it out. I smooth it out with a plastic, scraper, and make sure that the corners are down good. The bottom, there's no air pockets. I'll smooth that out with my hand, so that make sure that's all completely smooth. Then I start to cut, and I use a metal scraper to when I cut, because the blade will not cut into it. It will cut potentially, if it slips or something, into the plastic. So I use a metal blade, basically just a wallpaper, a drywall blade,
And then I cut all the way around. Again, make sure it's all smooth. And then the drawer liner is in. And now I do this 11 more times. The other thing that I normally do on these dressers, on the drawers, is renourish them, so to speak. Um, I use Howard feed and wax, and this happens to be in an orange scent. Um, you got to be careful of that, though. I had one customer one time that wouldn't buy my dresser because she said she had reactions to scents, and I'd used this on the drawers, and she wouldn't buy it. So they do come in scents that are not scented, but I happen to like the orange. So I just, squeeze this on and wipe it down with a rag, and I do this on the outside, on the sides. I don't normally do the back, but I do it on the sides. I do it on the insides of the drawers, and of course after I put the drawer liners down because I don't want anything on the bottom of the drawers that would prohibit the liners from sticking. So I do this afterwards, and this does it. It makes the wood just pop and shine. It smells good, and it's just a little added touch that you can do just to take your dresser or your nightstands or whatever you're doing just to that next level. It doesn't take long, but it can make a big difference in your final quality of your refinishing project. So if you remember, this is where we started from, and this is where we ended up. I think that the tan wash was the perfect choice after I got the project done. As you recall, I was kind of waffling back and forth what to do, but this just turned out gorgeous. It highlights the grain in the top and on the drawers, and I ended up really liking the two-tone look it gave with the tan wash. And with the new gold hardware, it's just beautiful. I hope you liked this video, and I hope you learned something or found it entertaining. And if you have, please subscribe, and I appreciate it. And we will see you on the next video from the next season.